Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and tonight we thought we'd have a look at fortifications, another interest of mine, mainly because it's connected with military history, and we're going to take a specific look at 17th century fortifications. However, saying that, you need to look at what happened before the 17th century. So if you think about it, we've always felt the need to be up high. That's always been a human trait as such, really. If you're at the top of the hill, obviously you'll be able to see for many, many miles, and you would always be able to fight off your attacker. You'll also be able to see them coming. So when they are pounding up the hill out of breath at you, they're easier to kill if you're at the top of the hill. And you've only got to look at how battles are often won. If you think about the Battle of Hastings, if you think about the Battle of Marston Moor, Battle of Edge Hill, for example, they're usually won over one side or another taking the high ground. So we've always felt the need to get up high, and therefore if you have a look at the oldest form of fortification, really, we've probably had earthwork enclosures. That's the best word for them, really, where someone's decided to get up high and then dig a ditch all the way around their settlement, and then the soil that they've excavated from the ditch becomes a basic rampart. And then as time went on, people added to it. For example, they chopped trees down and set them on top of that, creating technically a palisade, which is what I always say looks very much like the old cowboy and Indian films from my childhood, really. A proper fortification with a wooden palisade around. The only problem with fortifications like that is they can be taken relatively easy if your enemy makes use of fire, and obviously because they're made of wood they don't last very long. But the ultimate form of fortification in the past, and we're talking about the very distant past now, really, is what is often referred to as the hill fort, the Celtic hill fort, the Iron Age enclosure fort, and these have been looked at over the years for one reason or other, mainly from the archaeology, but also from the cultural side of things as well. And probably the best example we've got in Britain is the one in my book here. I don't know if you can see it here, which is actually Maiden Castle. And it's funny because it's called Maiden Castle, but it starts life literally as a hill fort. And these things are quite interesting. Some people say these fortifications, these enclosures, were only manned in time of war. Other people say, no, these are how we used to live. We used to live in these Iron Age hill forts dotted all over the country. They take up the high ground. You've got a ditch, and you've also got a rampart and a palisade, and in theory you live in there. Or if you believe the people that believe that people lived elsewhere and went in there in time of war, this would be your fighting area, a huge fighting area, to be fair. So it's a bit of a debate that's going on. It's been debated for hundreds of years, even from the Victorian age, really. Are these Iron Age hill forts forts, or are they places where we live, an enclosure? We will never fully know, to be fair. But Maiden Castle is quite an intricate one because there's lots of different ways in, and when you do get in, some of them lead to nowhere. It's very cleverly laid out. If you want to have a look at one closer to home, and when I'm talking home, we're talking Worcestershire, that's where we're based, you're better off going to somewhere like British Camp up on the Malvern Hills, and you'll be able to see how intricate they are. They're absolutely fantastic things. But then the Romans come along and they give us a true fortification. They obviously give us the marching camps. They also give us the true fortification as we know them. And if you want to go and see some of those, if you do get a chance to go away this summer, if the lockdown is completely eased, Hadrian's Wall is the best place to go, and you'll be able to walk along that wall or drop off, drive in, pop into the different forts, many of them owned by English Heritage. Some of the best ones, really, one of my favourite ones is Chester's Roman Fort, and they're all laid out in the same way, initially of timber and turf, later on made of stone, and they are famously in the shape of a playing card. In other words, they're rectangle, rounded edges, and you will usually get a north gate, a south gate, an east and a west, and you will usually have it laid out with the headquarters building in the middle, the commandant's building to the far side, granaries and barracks absolutely all over the place, and usually with some form of bathhouse nearby. Technically not inside, they were generally outside. So it's quite interesting that we've gone from earthworks and turf to now being made out of stone. But then the only big jump really with enclosures and things comes along when we get the Anglo-Saxon era, and that's when you get people like King Alfred, later to be called King Alfred the Great, comes up with this idea of the burg system, which is the defended towns as such really, and he once again orders the digging of ditches, the earth being thrown up to make a rampart, palisade on, and these gates going around the edge. But then in 1066 famously we get you guessed it, the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the Battle of Fulford Gate, turn them the other way around, and then the Battle of Hastings. It was the year of three great battles. And the interesting thing is, after the Battle of Hastings and we get the conquest, William the Conqueror actually brought with him some prefabricated, some flat pack forts, and he built those on the south coast. And then eventually, as he conquered this country, as the Romans did from south to north, he then started building the true Norman castle, which at the time was nothing more than what was called a motte and bailey. And this is where you have this artificial mound with a turret at the top, technically a keep type of building, and then you have the bailey at the very bottom, which would have all your blacksmith, your stables, the feasting hall, the lodgings of different people, and obviously that would be moated, and it would have a palisade, and you would have gates to come in and out. And it's only if the bailey gets attacked that you end up going up onto the motte and finally fighting off your attackers at the top. Once again, there are examples of those up and down the country. If you go to York, for example, you'll be able to walk up to the top of what is now called Clifford's Tower. That's a true motte and bailey there, and there are many of them up and down the country. In some cases, there's nothing left of them, but you do notice this very strange mound, and they're usually motte and bailey castles, but you don't always, please don't always assume they are. If you think of a structure near Worcester, which is often referred to as Whittington Tump, people often make the mistake of saying that is a motte and bailey. Unfortunately, it's not. But then as the medieval period goes on, because it is a long one, it goes on and on and on and on and on, you then get the true castle. And these are the ones that are eventually all made out of stone, usually local stone. Worcester had one as well. This book actually covers the making of a new castle that's been going on in France. I can't remember the place now without looking in here, but they've actually reconstructed it, and they've reconstructed it using all the old techniques. The first medieval castle to be built in Europe, really since the Middle Ages as such. But eventually these castles were no good, and that's really down to the invention of black powder. And it's very much like why knights in armour went out of fashion. As knights went into battle and the gun was invented, the armour was a waste of time. So eventually the castles are a waste of time because cannons blast holes in them. If you go to Goodrich Castle in Herefordshire, you'll be able to see the damage of a Civil War siege where cannons have pretty much flattened it. Most of the ruins in this country are not ruins from medieval wars, for example. Most of the ruined castles in Britain are a result of the English civil wars, really, where they are just battered by the enemy, which is why you do get a new style of defence, and that's really what I'm going to end on. It is often referred to as the earthwork, sometimes referred to as the blockhouse. There's an area in Worcester called the blockhouse, and it is also referred to as the star fort as well. And this is a technique that came from Europe, and people like Prince Rupert, who had fought in Europe during the 30 Years' War, brought these ideas back, and it was a way of upgrading the old medieval stone defences to this new style. And this is a diagram of one of those star forts. And we're lucky in Worcester, we actually have two technically. One was built on the old Castle Mound in 1651 to house cannon, and then we have a large one on a hill outside the city to the south, just off London Road, which is now known as Fort Royal. It's a very good invention because it's really gone back to the beginning when we have earth defences. In other words, you dig it out of earth and you back it up with timber. So it's going right back to the very beginning. And this was good because the problem with cannons is they will bring stonework to the ground. Whereas earth, the cannonball, a solid lump of iron, will actually bury itself into the earth. So it's a very, very good technique. And after a battle, after a siege, or during the lull of the siege, you can send men out to literally patch the thing up. More earth, more timber, and he's ready to take more cannonballs. But the way it works is you usually start by building a square fort, a blockhouse is such really, a redoubt, and then you add on very cleverly these diamonds, which are known as bastions, and they're very clever because they're all designed to assist each other. In other words, the angles of them is laid out so if the enemy should take the one corner here, then the other three will still be able to fire on it and also barricade it in cut it off from everywhere else, so to prevent the enemy from taking the whole fort. It's a very, very clever technique. Some of the ones in Europe gets very technical. Some of the ones in Europe actually mixes stone into the equation as well. And if you look at the outside of one, you should have a little bank on the outer edge of the ditch. And the idea of that is as cannons try and fire at the earth, the cannonballs hit it and they bounce up and over the top of the fort. So it acts like a bumper as such really. Cannonballs hit it and it bounces up and over the top. And then there's usually a fire step, so you can actually have musketeers on that outside defence, on the outskirts of your fort. But the main thing is this ditch in between. Sometimes water filled, but most of the time in the 17th century it was just earth. You don't want to be in there because musketeers from up on the ramparts will fire down at you. And then to stop people from getting ladders to put them up onto your parapet, you usually set it with storm poles. Now, I have a huge model here that I'm just going to end on. It's quite spectacular and it shows a grand old 17th century fortification. The ammo store is in the middle. I don't know if you can see that there, but this is the parapet, and these stakes going around the edge are the storm poles, and they're very close together because if anyone tries to put a ladder up to get onto the parapet, they will find one or two of these stakes pointing down at them. They won't be able to get past them really. You could say they'd chop them with axes in bill hooks where they'd have a job, because up here you would have all your musketeers. And like I said, from these outer bastions you would have cross fire from the top. So you've got the musketeers firing down, cannons roaring away on the four corners. They're very, very good fortifications. And like I said, any cannonballs that hit this stuff, because of it being made of turf, earth, and backed up with wood, it doesn't do that much damage for them really. Worcester had one of these, like I said, a small one on Old Castle Mound, and the big one on what was called Fort Royal. But afterwards, when you get to the Georgian period, it's quite interesting that those sort of fortifications do continue for a while. And you also have the resurrection of stone and brick forts coming in. If you go to places like Scotland, for example, you'll be able to see places like Fort George, Corgarth Castle, where you have that sort of design, a star fort, but this time made out of brick and stone. If you want to see a good quality star fort, other than the one at Worcester, go to the one in Newark, because there's one that you can actually have a wander around, and it looks more like a fort than the one at Worcester. Worcester's one, you've really got to look for it. Anyway, that's been a bit of an introduction on fortifications, in particular the 17th century. Hope you enjoyed our whistle stop tour, and we'll see you tomorrow with yet another interesting video. See you soon. Bye bye.